It almost never begins with terror. That is the lie movies tell because silence doesn't sell tickets. In real life, it begins much earlier, much quieter, in the spaces people don't pay attention to, in the moments they dismiss as irrelevant, in the seconds where nothing seems to happen, except something noticing you. The Donovan family had no reason to believe they were special. No warnings. No cursed bloodline. No dark history attached to their name. Just a house that looked like thousands of others, standing politely in its place, pretending to be harmless, pretending to be empty, pretending it had never listened to conversations whispered at night. The kind of house where laughter echoed naturally, where doors closed without complaint, where the air felt neutral, at least at first. The Donovans were normal in the most dangerous way possible. They trusted routine. They trusted familiarity. They trusted that bad things required bad intentions. They had been taught, as most people are, that evil announces itself loudly, that it storms in, that it breaks windows and shouts its name. They did not understand that some things wait. The youngest daughter was bored. Not bored in the dramatic sense, not restless or angry, just quietly dissatisfied with how little the world explained itself. She was at that age where questions grow faster than answers, where adults respond with smiles instead of truth, and where curiosity begins to feel like rebellion. She asked about death once. The answer was vague. She asked about God. The answer was symbolic. She asked what happens when people disappear. And that question lingered in the air far longer than anyone noticed. Children don't seek darkness. They seek honesty. And when honesty doesn't come from adults, they look elsewhere. Someone mentioned a board, not with reverence, not with fear, but casually, like mentioning a game, like mentioning something harmless and slightly forbidden, which only made it more interesting. A Ouija board. Cardboard. Printed letters. A plastic planchette light enough to move with a breath. Mass-produced mystery sold under the assumption that belief is optional. The irony, of course, is that belief has never been a requirement. The board entered the house without ceremony. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't blessed or rejected. It was placed somewhere between toys and forgotten objects, treated with the exact level of respect that guarantees consequences. The first time she used it, she laughed. Laughter is disarming. It lowers defenses. It signals safety. She placed her fingers lightly, exactly as instructed, not out of fear, but because rules are comforting when stepping into the unknown. She asked simple questions at first, the kind that feel safe because they seem meaningless. Is anyone here? What's your name? Are you real? The planchette moved. Not quickly. Not dramatically. It moved with patience. As if whatever was answering had been waiting for the question rather than rushing to respond, as if time meant nothing to it, as if it understood something humans often forget. That certainty is far more unsettling than chaos. The board spelled answers that didn't feel random. They felt deliberate. And that was the first mistake. Assuming imagination hesitates. Imagination stutters. Imagination corrects itself. This did neither. The second mistake was curiosity without supervision. She came back to the board alone. No witnesses to reinterpret events. No shared memory to dilute responsibility. Just a child and something that never needed a body to exist. The questions changed slowly, almost politely, the way conversations do when trust begins to form. They became less playful and more personal, less about the world and more about her. Do you see me? Are you with me now? Do you like talking to me? And something, somewhere beyond whatever people like to imagine as distance, understood something very clearly. This door had been opened without resistance. The house noticed first. Not the family. The house. It began expressing opinions in subtle ways, the kind that invite denial rather than alarm. Sounds at night that could be blamed on pipes. Footsteps that didn't quite sound human, but also didn't sound impossible. Objects moved just enough to create doubt rather than fear. A chair slightly turned. A door left open when it had been closed. Toys that appeared in rooms no one remembered carrying them into. The mother blamed exhaustion. The father blamed logic. The older children blamed each other. Everyone blamed something harmless. Everyone except the youngest daughter. She didn't feel threatened. She felt accompanied. That distinction matters. Poltergeist activity doesn't begin with violence because violence reveals intent too quickly. It escalates, like a conversation that slowly turns cruel once it knows it won't be interrupted. Knocks became louder. Whispers became intelligible. The air grew heavy, as if the house was holding its breath. Objects stopped relocating and started flying. A lamp didn't fall. It was thrown. Not randomly. Purposefully. Walls vibrated. Beds shook. The atmosphere changed in a way that language struggles to capture, because fear isn't always sharp. Sometimes it's thick. Sometimes it's suffocating. Sometimes it feels like being watched by something that doesn't blink. And through all of it, the youngest daughter remained untouched. That wasn't kindness. That was precision. Faith entered the house late, as it often does. Prayers weren't protection. They were apologies. Requests made after permission had already been granted. They prayed louder as things grew worse. Convinced volume could compensate for timing. They didn't understand that boundaries mean nothing once they're crossed willingly. The entity never introduced itself properly. Names are power, and power wasn't the goal. It lied instead. It claimed innocence. It claimed loneliness. It claimed familiarity. It positioned itself as a friend while systematically dismantling the environment around her, isolating the family, turning stress into confusion, confusion into fear, and fear into vulnerability. Activity increased when she was calm. It faded when she was upset. That pattern wasn't accidental. It was conditioning. By the time the Donovans reached out for help, the house no longer felt like a place people lived. It felt occupied. Scratches appeared where hands shouldn't reach. Sounds came from rooms that were empty. Running footsteps echoed upstairs when no one was home. And always, beneath it all, that unmistakable sensation that something was not merely present, but attentive. Calling Ed and Lorraine Warren wasn't an act of courage. It was an admission. An admission that whatever had been invited had not come alone and had no intention of leaving quietly. Later, the Warrens would say that what disturbed them most about this case wasn't the aggression, or even the manifestations. It was the method. This wasn't an attack. It was a conversation that never should have started, a negotiation entered without understanding the terms, a reminder that innocence, when unguarded, is not protection. It's leverage. And the most unsettling truth of all remained unspoken, hanging in the air like a breath that refused to dissipate. The door was still open, because no one had said goodbye. Not yet. When Ed and Lorraine Warren stepped into the Donovan house, they did not announce themselves to the room. They never did. Houses, after all, are not impressed by credentials, and whatever was waiting inside that place had long since stopped caring about human titles. What mattered was presence, and the Warrens brought a very particular kind of it. The air inside the house felt wrong in a way that resisted description. Not cold, not heavy, not oppressive in any theatrical sense. It felt aware, as if the space itself had already taken notes on everyone who had ever crossed its threshold. Lorraine felt it first. She always did. It was not fear that registered in her body, but recognition. That quiet, unwelcome familiarity that comes when something ancient realizes it is no longer alone. Her expression didn't change, not visibly, but her breathing adjusted, slower, more deliberate, as if instinctively conserving something precious. Ed, on the other hand, did what he always did. He observed. He listened. He watched how the house behaved around them, how the walls seemed closer than they should be, how the silence didn't relax when new people entered, but tightened, like a muscle preparing to respond. The Donovans spoke quickly. They always do. People who have lived with prolonged fear rarely tell stories in order. They unload them. Sounds, movements, nights without sleep. Objects breaking for no reason that ever felt honest. Their words overlapped, contradicted each other, corrected themselves. Chaos trying to explain chaos. The youngest daughter sat quietly. Too quietly. She didn't cling to her parents. Didn't cry. Didn't ask who the visitors were. She watched. And that, more than anything else, unsettled Lorraine. Children in danger usually radiate distress. This one radiated calm. Not peace. Calm. The kind that feels borrowed. When Lorraine gently asked her if she had spoken to anyone unusual lately, the girl smiled in a way that wasn't inappropriate, but wasn't entirely innocent either. It was the smile of someone who feels included in a secret. Yes, she said, but it doesn't like when I talk about it. That was the moment the house responded. Not with noise. Not with violence. With pressure. The temperature shifted slightly. Just enough to be noticed, but not enough to be blamed. The air thickened, as if the room resented the direction of the conversation. Ed noticed immediately. He had seen this pattern before. Whatever was present wasn't reacting emotionally. It was reacting strategically. The Warrens began their investigation the same way they always did. Slowly, methodically, without provoking. Questions were asked of the house itself, not aloud, but through observation. Where activity occurred most often. When it escalated. Who was present when it happened? Every answer pointed back to the same place. The child, not as the source, as the focus. The irony of possession cases is that people expect spectacle, contortions, voices, dramatics. What they rarely expect is patience. What was attached to the Donovan house had no interest in rushing. It had invested time. It had built trust. It had learned. Lorraine sensed multiple presences, layered rather than singular. This was not one voice shouting into the dark. It was a chorus whispering in coordination, overlapping intentions with unsettling harmony. Poltergeist activity, in this context, was not random chaos. It was environmental manipulation. Stress applied to a system already emotionally compromised. Fear wasn't the goal. Control was. The Warrens requested that the Ouija board be brought out. The mother hesitated. That hesitation was telling. The board had stopped being a toy long before this moment. It had become an object of quiet dread, something no one wanted to acknowledge but no one dared discard. It was found tucked away, not destroyed, not blessed, just hidden. The human equivalent of hoping problems dissolve if ignored. When the board was placed on the table, the atmosphere changed immediately. Not violently. Precisely. Lorraine later described the sensation as standing too close to something that recognized her. Something that did not fear her, but respected her enough to be cautious. The planchette did not move. Not yet. Ed instructed everyone to leave the room except himself, Lorraine, and the child. That decision was not made lightly. But whatever was present had already isolated her psychologically. Physical proximity was no longer the primary risk. The girl placed her fingers on the planchette without hesitation, without instruction, without fear. Her posture was relaxed, almost familiar, as if she were greeting an old acquaintance. The first movement came slowly, deliberately. The planchette spelled nothing meaningful at first. Broken words, half answers, distractions, testing. Ed interrupted. Firmly. Authority, when used correctly, is disruptive. The response shifted immediately. Letters formed faster now. Sharper. More aggressive. Lorraine felt it then. The unmistakable shift from curiosity to irritation. Whatever was communicating did not appreciate interference. It had not expected resistance from someone who understood the language it was using. The entity lied. Again, it claimed to be a protector. A guide. A presence drawn by loneliness. Classic narratives. Well practiced. But lies have texture, and Lorraine felt the seams. Beneath the story was something colder, something indifferent to the family's well-being, something far more interested in the access it had been granted. When Ed commanded the entity to identify itself truthfully, the house reacted violently. A chair slid across the floor. A picture frame shattered against the wall. The lights flickered. Not dramatically, but insistently, like a warning. The girl stiffened, not in pain. In conflict. Her breathing changed, shallow now, uncertain. For the first time since the Warrens arrived, she looked afraid. Not of what was happening, but of what might be taken from her. Lorraine reached out, placing a hand gently on the child's shoulder, grounding her. That physical contact mattered. It reminded the girl of something fundamental. That she was not alone. That connection did not require whispers from unseen places. The reaction was immediate. The planchette flew off the board. Not pushed. Thrown. The message was clear. The negotiation had failed. The Warrens understood then that this was no longer a matter of cleansing energy or dismissing a presence. This was an infestation that had woven itself into the emotional fabric of the household. An exorcism was discussed. Not performed immediately. That detail is important. Exorcism is not a performance. It is an escalation. And escalations have consequences. The Warrens knew that whatever they were dealing with had invested too much to retreat quietly. A priest was contacted. Faith, once again, arrived late. As preparations were made, activity intensified throughout the house. Not random outbursts, but targeted disruptions. Rooms associated with family connection were affected first. The living room, the parents' bedroom, shared spaces. Isolation was being reinforced. The child began having nightmares she could not describe, waking with words on her lips that did not belong to her vocabulary. Her demeanor shifted subtly, not overtly hostile, but distant, as if part of her attention was constantly elsewhere. Watching. Listening. Waiting. The night of the attempted exorcism did not unfold like stories prefer. There was no dramatic levitation, no spinning heads, no cinematic climax. Instead, there was resistance. Relentless, suffocating resistance. Prayers were met with mockery. Commands were met with silence. Holy symbols felt heavy, ineffective, almost decorative. Lorraine sensed something chillingly clear. This was not possession in the traditional sense. This was occupation by consent. The entity had never forced entry. It had been invited, and it had no intention of leaving behind what it had been promised. By the end of the night, the house was quieter. Not cleansed. Quieter. The activity receded, not vanished, like a predator retreating just far enough to avoid immediate danger. The Warrens knew that outcome well. This was not a victory. It was a pause. Later, Lorraine would admit that this case unsettled her in ways few others had. Not because of what she saw, but because of what she understood. That the most effective doorways are not created by rituals or symbols. They are created by curiosity, by neglect, and by the deeply human mistake of believing that innocence is enough to protect itself. The Donovan house stood still once more, appearing normal to anyone who didn't know what to listen for. But something remained. Patient. Observant. And very aware that conversations, once started, do not always end just because someone stopped speaking. Time did not heal the Donovan house. It merely taught it patience. In the weeks following the attempted exorcism, the family convinced themselves that quiet meant safety. Humans have always been eager to mistake absence of noise for absence of threat, as if danger were obligated to announce itself on schedule. The house behaved. No flying objects, no violent manifestations, no obvious defiance. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it was surgical. Ed Warren warned them gently, carefully choosing his words, knowing how fragile denial becomes once fear has exhausted itself. Whatever had been invited had not been expelled. It had retreated, reorganized, adapted, like something intelligent enough to understand that survival sometimes requires restraint. The family nodded. People always nod when they hear truths they cannot afford to fully accept. Daily life resumed, at least outwardly. School mornings, meals eaten together, conversations that avoided certain subjects with impressive coordination. The Ouija board was gone. Not destroyed, not cleansed, simply removed, as if distance alone could undo intimacy. But removal is not erasure. Lorraine sensed it even when she was no longer physically present in the house. The connection lingered faintly, like a thread pulled too tight to fully snap. The entity, or entities, had not anchored themselves to the object. They had anchored themselves to attention. The youngest daughter changed in ways subtle enough to be dismissed individually, but unmistakable when viewed as a whole. She became quieter, more inward, less interested in play and more attentive to empty spaces. She stared longer at corners. She paused before answering questions, as if waiting for confirmation from someone else. Not possessed. Influenced. That distinction mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. The irony of unresolved cases is that they don't end with catastrophe. They end with compromise. Life doesn't collapse, it bends. People adapt to tension the way they adapt to pain, by normalizing it until it becomes invisible. The Donovans learned to live with the feeling of being slightly out of sync with their own home. Doors closed too slowly. Rooms that felt colder for no measurable reason. The sense that conversations sometimes carried one listener too many. Nothing dramatic enough to call for help again. Nothing subtle enough to ignore completely. Ed and Lorraine documented the case carefully, reluctantly. Not because it lacked severity, but because it resisted classification. It refused to behave according to established patterns. There was no clear victory, no definitive expulsion, no moment where the line could be drawn and labeled after. The case remained open. That detail haunted Lorraine. Not every darkness is loud. Some simply embed themselves, waiting for conditions to favor them again. Waiting for curiosity to resurface. Waiting for isolation. Waiting for someone, someday, to ask the wrong question at the wrong time. The Warrens spoke less publicly about the Donovan case than others. There was no dramatic conclusion to recount, no spectacle that translated well into lectures or books. Audiences prefer closure. This case offered none. What remained instead was an uncomfortable lesson, one that didn't flatter human intuition or faith or intelligence. That evil does not always corrupt through force. Sometimes it collaborates. It waits to be trusted. It waits to be included. It waits to be listened to. And it uses the most reliable key humanity has ever provided: innocence. The Donovan family was never fully consumed. That, perhaps, was the cruelest part. They were left intact enough to doubt themselves, to question whether anything truly happened at all. Trauma without validation. Fear without proof. The youngest daughter eventually grew older, her memories blurring at the edges, softened by time and the human mind's remarkable ability to protect itself through forgetting. But forgetting is not the same as severing. Some doors, once opened, do not close. They simply wait. The Donovan house still stands, unremarkable, blending into its surroundings, doing what it has always done best. Appearing normal. Houses like that exist everywhere, quiet witnesses to moments that never made headlines, to conversations that ended without resolution. And that may be the most unsettling truth of all. Not that something followed an invitation, but that it was never formally asked to leave. Because the most dangerous stories are not the ones with clear endings. They are the ones that simply stop being told. And somewhere, in the silence that follows, something listens. Patiently.